Thank you all so much for joining us today for a very special session with Dr. Tyson Yunkaporta. My name is Michael Richardson, and I'm a Senior Research Fellow and Co-Director of the Media Futures Hub. Today's event is part of the School of the Arts and Media seminar series, and we're doing it in collaboration with the Media Futures Hub here in the Faculty of Arts, Design and Architecture. I'm coming to you today from the unceded lands of the Bidjigal people of the Eora Nation and want to acknowledge elders past and present and extend my respect to any Indigenous people who are joining us today. The struggle for justice for the first people of this place continues, and settler colonial institutions like the university are places where much work is needed. And I hope that hearing a little from Tyson today will help us towards that. So Tyson Yunkaporta is a scholar, art critic and researcher, a carver of traditional tools and weapons, and a senior lecturer in Indigenous Knowledges at Deakin University in Melbourne. He belongs to the Apalech Clan of far north Queensland and is the author of the wonderful book Sand Talk, How Indigenous Thinking Can Save the World. I've wanted to have Tyson speak here at UNSW since I first read his book in 2019, not long after it was published. It's a powerful read. It's thoughtful, revolutionary, humble, and really quite funny in many places. In the book, Tyson brings Indigenous knowledges to a host of challenges of the contemporary world, beginning always with complexity, relationality, and lived material experience. Against the Enlightenment tendency to complicate in the search for simple explanations, Tyson teaches us to accept the frailty of abstract knowledge and the depth that comes with yarning, with getting uncomfortable, with gesture and incompleteness and embodied learning. So today, Tyson will speak for a while, and then we'll use whatever time we have left before 1 p.m. For discussion. Then we'll take a short break, and anyone who'd like to stick around and talk more about the book specifically, whether you've read a few pages of it or you've gone through it cover to cover, anyone who'd like to is welcome to stick around for that. Tyson's internet connection is a little bit shaky, so he's going to leave the video off, and please bear with us if there are any glitches in the sound. Unfortunately, we didn't have the resources to provide closed captioning to make this event fully accessible, but I will be looking to do that with the recording that could be made available to people after the event. Without further ado, Tyson Yunkaporta, over to you.
Hey, how you going? Really good to see you. I hope you can hear me okay. So let's just, if it's the right message, then I guess the right signal will come through. There's, there's lately not much signal and a lot of noise in the world. And, and even through that broken signal, there's not a lot of good story coming through. Hopefully we'll have some good story for you today. We'll get into that idea of what's the difference between good story and bad story. You've got to have your foundational narratives right. So I might kick off with some story about the word smart. Yeah. Have a look at all these smart houses and smart contracts and everything else, and we'll see how clever they really are. Look, everything, I don't know, if you really are making sure that in a foundational way, the foundations of your knowledge are sitting in good story, then there has to be room for nuance always. And I think that's the key to understanding good story and bad story. I mean, for a start, good story has place, but also it has room for nuance. There are no absolutes. You need to look at the stack that you're inhabiting intellectually and look at all the different layers of abstraction that have been built into that stack and how much of them are actually grounded in that mycelium of good story. It's very difficult. But I guess, yeah, so placelessness is one of the landmarks, I guess, of bad story. But there are other things as well. The idea of there being absolutes and no room for nuance is one of the things that make your foundational knowledge is not very smart. Yeah. So I'm talking to you today from Bunurong country. So, I would talk about this, Bunurong country here in terms of, my relationships to elders and knowledge keepers and community, and my kind of cultural role here as being quite precarious and temporary. And I'm here because of child custody issues. I need to be here for about another 2 or 3 years at least before I can head back up home. So in the meantime, this community is sort of hosting me here. There's some elders who I have very strong permissions with to do cultural things, and other elders that I'm still in a process of bringing myself in a proper relation with them. This takes a long time, and with the country here, it's quite unfamiliar to me. But I sort of I come into relation with the place by looking at the groundwater. And it's interesting in Melbourne, what they call now. There is a lot of groundwater and around here, and some of it's still good. There are rivers that have been sort of diverted and changed in their course, to go somewhere else. But the original river is still running under the ground as well. Because in the sort of architectures of civilization, there are a lot of considerations, complicated considerations to bring into place. You might have an undesirable community with river frontage, and it's easier to move the river than it is to move the community to sort out your zoning and your real estate. Because God forbid, suddenly, river frontage at some stage would have been, not a great place to live, maybe in the colony. And then all of a sudden it's desirable. And so we can't allow that to hit the marketplace with all these poor people sitting there, all these marginalized groups. We can't have all these Wogs and Chinese and all kinds of things there doing well out of that. So and it's too hard to move them. Let's just move the river. And we're gonna, I got no proof that that's the reason for moving the river, but it's always a consideration, the sort of zoning. Real estate is an industry that sort of defines anything that you're going to do in your discipline. If you're designing civil spaces, if you're designing, housing, if you're designing, places for people to be, you're designing spaces that protect capital. You're designing spaces that facilitate the use of violence to protect property, which is very difficult. Even if you're trying to render these things smart, you're trying to use blockchain and cryptocurrencies and different encryptions and things like that in order to sort of redistribute value. You're looking at decentralizing authority and decentralizing economies to make things smarter, to make things more fair, but it still demands that there is that central authority of the settler state in place to protect the location of the servers that you need for that, and your property, of course, all the property that's needed to keep the digital infrastructure in place, that must be protected. It must maintain value. You can only have that property or use that property if it is of value, as capital, as a place to store cash, to park, ill-gotten gain for oligarchs. That's what land is. Land is something that is, the mycelium of the financial system. Land is not land anymore. Land is capital. Land is an asset that you can leverage to borrow against, to get, and then to be able to gamble with those things which are insured and fractally, kind of speculated on into infinity, but at all that stack of abstractions, that sort of Dutch financial system that began about 500 years ago, that is all built on the mycelium of land, on That's the bottom of the evolutionary stack there. So we as humans don't have access to land. The land and the built environments that you're placing upon the land, they're not really for people. You know, you're creating capital that is meant to be leveraged by oligarchs to create more debt, to create more wealth, to be able to transfer wealth from, one generation to the next, 2 generations to the next. So, I mean, I imagine there's a lot of Gen Xers here, and maybe a few Gen Xers and millennials and Gen Z people here. Your inheritance is nothing. And that's been taken from you by these by these oligarchs. You don't get to have that. That's already been spent. And that's part of this transfer of wealth. Wealth is also transferred from, the bottom sort of, 70% or so of the population, and increasing, the lower you get in that stack, the more horrendous things get. This is a caste system that's established, and it's established through the manipulation of space. These caste systems are systemic, and they're not systemic because of people's bad attitudes. They're systemic because of the regulations that you have to follow in what you can build and how. And these things are managed, these things are zoned in ways that keep caste systems in place. The way you finance your operations to build something, that's part of it. You have to operate within a growth-based economy. And within a growth-based economy, things can only have value. They can only be priced if they're limitable and excludable. So there has to be a limited number that only goes to a certain amount of selected people, higher caste people in the caste system. It has to be excludable so that the bottom half of the caste system does not have access to the same kind of things. You can only have economic growth in your growth-based economic system if the demand exceeds the supply. So there needs to be more people missing out on the basic things that they require for survival in order for those things to even be priced. There needs to be more people missing out than what there is. If that means you have to burn, 1 million tons of grain a week, or fruit or meat or anything else, in order to create an artificial scarcity, then that's what you need to do, because otherwise things can't be priced and economic growth can't continue. All of these things are sort of in a big meta-systemic dance. This is not a room full of evil white men sitting somewhere planning this stuff out. This is a dynamic, self-organizing system. It has achieved a state of complexity whereby there is a kind of singularity that any complex adaptive system ends up achieving. It's a not quite sentience in the way that you might think of sentience, but it's sentience in an indigenous way of looking at it. So it is adaptive, it is self-organizing. It does combine a lot of different systems together, and it does influence your movement around that system as a node. And it does categorize and sort all those nodes and set them to work doing different things. So the caste system is built in. The caste system is not something, we have this fantasy that we're in, because we're in a representative democracy, that somehow the aggregate of all our attitudes and our beliefs and understanding and bloody fabulous consciousness and, our collective self-actualization is what creates all of these conditions. It's what, inequality arises it's just out of ignorance. It's just people's lack of understanding. If they could just see, if they could just understand, we've got to do more cultural awareness training, because the more people are aware of inequality, then the structural inequality structural inequality is structural. It's not sitting in people's heads. It's in the structures of everything you do. Everything you build is zoned, within a whole heap of other different interconnected systems within a massive self-organizing system. These things are zoned. These things are priced. There are mechanisms in place for inclusion and exclusion that, for example, is the reason why you can't find anywhere to take a piss in Perth unless you're there for a meeting or you're having lunch somewhere. in the city of Perth, I don't know, I haven't been there for a few years, but it used to be that was how you would limit the amount of time that blackfellas could spend in the CBD, is that there are no public toilets. So unless you're there for a meeting, unless you manage to rise individually into temporary membership of a higher caste through your purchasing power, like if you blow your whole paycheck on one lunch, then you can be there and you can take a piss. Otherwise, what are you doing here, black? You get out. And, you know, that's a wide net to cast across that caste system. And that doesn't just catch black people there, that catches all kinds of people who find themselves excluded for one reason or another, economically marginalized, distanced, placed from the center. That's something that the system is constantly having to shift and change around and move people through. So you're sitting within a caste system, you're sitting within a financial system, you're sitting within a system that's basically a self-terminating, it's running on a self-terminating algorithm, because its end game is about transferring all wealth, all resources, all lands, everything to a certain handful of people. And then, you know, and that's it. That's the only place that it can go. And it can only result in the destruction of even that handful of people and all land, all habitat. It's really accelerated over the last 4 decades, in which you've seen 60% of the biodiversity that existed 4 decades ago has been destroyed completely. And that's exponentially increasing in this L curve. Everything that you build can only contribute to that. Everything that you make, everything that you design, you can decolonize your practice, but I can guarantee you that the decolonizing methodologies you are using are only in service to the same machine, and that they are a part of the self-terminating algorithm of civilization. Because you will only see the colony, you will only see settlement, you will only see the decolonizing process of decoupling from a motherland, and that's about it. And you think that if your administration is decoupled, that if the, you know, the basic pomp and ceremony and rituals of governance, you think if they're coming from a, you know, an independent nation, a little republic here, that suddenly the colony will be gone, ended, you'll have decolonized. How's that working out for you, Mozambique? How's that working out for you, India? How's that working out for you, South Africa? You know, you always end up with a massive amount of capital flight from the minority, the dominant minority there. You end up with, you know, puppet governments in place. You end up with basically, instead of you know, an imperial administration, you end up with a corporate administration that actually has no accountability for keeping you alive or paying the bills. They can then shift that bill paying onto the population of decolonized neoliberal subjects. Decolonization is bullshit, mostly, and it's basically a distraction so that you don't see the need for decivilization, that you don't ever critique what civilization is. You are free to critique the colony, because that's great. All that is fuel for the culture wars that keep everybody distracted from what's actually going on, which is, in the end, you know, a civilization is just a, you know, a growth-based economy that's gotten away from itself, that's running out of control. It's something that a community decides to experiment with hierarchies, with institutionalized permanent hierarchies that demand the importation of resources, and above all, this is what where you really need to look: the outsourcing of entropy, the outsourcing of externalities. So everything you do, if you truly want to be critically thinking about it, if you truly want to be at least moving towards a narrative of sustainability, you need to always ask yourself, what are the externalities that I'm producing? Because you might make a very smart building, a very smart place that is completely 100% carbon neutral, that's everything else, you know, it's made out of 100% recyclable things, and you might think that's a zero ecological footprint. In my cheeks, it is. It is not. That just means that you've outsourced your externalities to somewhere else. You're detonating the violence of that building in other places beyond the sanitized place that you've made safe for your violent act of creating, a space with no violence in it. Violence is part of every natural system, but it's supposed to be distributed evenly throughout it so it does minimal damage. These little places that most people are living in these, what's left of this declining bubble of, Western educated, industrialized, rich, democratic, societies, these little communities, these bubbles that exist with no violence, with their violence outsourced. These are in decline right now, and you might be noticing lately that semi-permeable membrane around your safe technological space is becoming a little more permeable. You might notice that membrane, the edges of it are coming in a bit, that there are neighborhoods that were safe that are no longer safe, and that zone is becoming smaller and smaller and more expensive. You might find that as the financial bubbles of real estate, for example, expand, that the safe technological, autocratic spaces of your sanitized reality, that the boundaries of that are becoming smaller and smaller. We have layers of abstraction to release your consciousness into that give the illusion of boundlessness and safety, though. But those are no longer safe in that cyberspace. You can buy cyber real estate if you like. I believe every atom of what's it called? Second Life. Every atom in Second Life has somebody's name on it. Somebody's property. That ended up getting financially leveraged about as far as it could. He's a good mate of mine, that fellow that Rosen, him that built that. He's building something else now. It's only in beta, but I've done a few events in there with him. We're trying it out. It's pretty cool. It's more of an audio reality that's about facilitating relationships, because really that is the only true space for infinite growth, is in that relational connection between yourself and another person or several other persons, human beings and non-human entities as well. In that relational space, you have room for infinite growth, infinite complexity, infinite combinatorials, and that's where infinite growth belongs. We call it increase in Aboriginal English. So it's like this increase ceremonies that you do. It's that ritual of increasing relatedness between humans and other humans, humans and places, humans and sentient entities in the landscape, non-human entities, etc. So here you are, you're in this growth-based, financialized stack that has so many abstractions in it that you don't know what's real or which stack you're currently inhabiting, because your spirit's divided across 8 of those little membranes at any time. You're split up like a science experiment with panes of glass and slides across a number of different stacks simultaneously, sitting and trying to figure out how to do things sustainably, how to make things smart. How do we decentralize things so that we can disrupt the self-terminating algorithm of this civilization? Oh, we can decentralize the economy. We can decentralize governance. We can reimagine value. We can do this through a blockchain. Oh, yeah. Software engineers can do this. We can do this with encryption. We can go, if we go with ETH, we can make smart contracts. A smart contract means, that, it's in a permanent, transparent, public, shared ledger. There's no middleman. If conditions are not met, then the next thing doesn't happen. If conditions are met, then the next thing happens. It's fully automated decision-making, taking the boss out of the equation, taking the landlord out of the equation. So, that landlord that you could call up and say, hey, Peter, look, you're going to have to wait till midday today because, there's been a problem at the bank. There's a software glitch. so their automatic payments won't go out, and I can't access my funds until midday today. I know it's rent day, and usually you get it 9 a.m. is the cutoff where you get that rent normally, but it's going to be till midday today because there's been a glitch at the bank. Yeah, don't panic. I'll make sure it's in there by this afternoon. All right, see you later, bros. That's that human interaction with a little bit of nuance there. Smart contract doesn't have that. Smart contract goes, okay, well, that rent hasn't been received. So in your smart house now, the door is locked. You're now homeless. You can't enter your home. And that's that. That's finished. That's frozen. And I guess if you want to appeal, and you have to, you're going to have to spend, 17 hours trying to get through a call center that's been designed to keep you as a human out of the loop. It's a horrendous thing. Everything these, smart communities, smart cities, we talk about. I mean, there's these outsourced efficiencies. A smart city is going to save 20% of water. It's ecological friendly because at peak times the water flow can be increased, by these sensors that aggregate all that information, and then it can be decreased at non-peak times. And that way we're going to save 20% of water use over 5 years. Therefore, a smart city, with 1 billion devices in it, all recording and uploading every aspect of reality in real time, that is going to be efficient. That is going to be smart, the good old smart city. And that is going to save the environment. We're going to save the environment by doing that. That'll be, hooked into your, there's speculation on your carbon credit offsets emissions, bloody trading scheme, when you're trading carbon futures and all kinds of things, in that another layer of abstraction. In the meantime, every single one of these devices contains rare earth metals, which are called rare earth metals for a reason. There's not much of them, and most of them exist on the lands of poor people and indigenous people. And the last people who are actually living close to their land, or were at least, they're not anymore. There's half of Africa dripping out of your phone. Every sensor. So this year it was 40 billion sensors were put in place to kick off the Internet of Things. And that's expected to increase by 4,000% every year thereafter. Now that's beyond, I wouldn't even know how to plot that exponential on a graph. That's not an L curve. That's going across 13 dimensions. I don't even know how you would make that graph. But we're looking at 4,000% minimum growth every year. So that's not a system doubling. That's a system increasing by 4,000 times. A system that kicks off being 40, 50 billion devices to start with, all filled with rare earth metals. And all that rare earth metal need to be, the refining process for that produces nuclear waste. Where is that violence outsourced to? Well, that has to be stored somewhere. It's usually stored on the land of poor people or indigenous people globally. Because remember, these Western educated, industrialized, rich, democratic people are a very tiny minority on the face of the earth. And that's mostly where all of these spaces are. They're also available to the very highest of the caste system in other countries as well. The people who are allowed those privileges in exchange for keeping the rest of the population in control, making sure the rest of the population doesn't organize and nationalize the resources. Because my God, what if the Congo got to keep the rare earth metals? What if they got to actually sell the rare earth metals? And that would be a disaster, because we need these people fighting each other. We need these people with child soldiers. We need these people dying. We need these people with HIV. We need them with access to no traditional medicines, let alone modern medicine. We need these people to be living lives of absolute desperation, and their existence needs to be unbearable, because that's the only way that we're still going to have access to all the rare earth metals needed to tinker this insane, smart fucking system, which doesn't seem very smart to me. Cause, I mean, Oh, no, it's going to be all right because we'll have blockchain. See, we'll have all these smart contracts. We're going to blockchain that. We're going to decentralize it. We're going to democratize everything. We're going to cut out the middleman. We're going to have automated governance. That's what's going to happen. It's going to be great. So you won't have to worry about that. That's it. Everything's going to be equal. We're going to, take trust out of the equation. We're going to make sure that we can't have bad actors polluting the commons. Everything's going to be just techno utopia. And eventually you'll be able to upload your consciousness to the cosmos. You'll be able to upload that through these satellites. Satellites, what? Yeah, well, satellites are a problem. That's another layer of architecture that's going on up there right now. Most of these satellites are weak as piss because they were made by people who were sitting in safe bubbles where they didn't think violence exists. Satellites were made by people who've never, ever been punched in the face. If you're making something in the world and you've never, ever been punched in the face, then you have no idea about the externalities you're creating. You've lived in a bubble where the violence has been outsourced elsewhere, and you're not designing anything for the real world. You're designing something for an illusion, a temporary illusion that's currently in a state of free fall collapse. The liberating bloody technologies that you're creating to decentralize all these things, are they going to work without a goddamn satellite? How are you going? How would you go with all this stuff if there was no satellite? What happens if the satellites are disrupted? Remember, these are weak as piss things made by people who think the world is peaceful because they're living in a place where their violence is outsourced. Some people are living in places where you do get punched in the face. And they've launched some of the satellites of their own. And their satellite a little bit different from these ones. They're not little pussy satellite. They have big fucking claw, can crush your satellite, throw him to fucking ground. We throw him in fucking Atlantic. Finished. All right, show me that smart village now. Show me your smart city. Your smart city shut down. None of you can get inside. Now you're homeless. You die. That's where we're up to. The only person on the planet who was smart enough to recognize that, shame of all shames, was Donald Trump. He at least put together a space force. First, you got to train them up, so you got to have a lot of space cadets doing that, and and everybody's laughing at him. And it's probably the only clever thing that freak did in the whole time he was there. But it's too late. It's too little too late. Those satellites are not secure. And at any minute, they can go down and then everything goes down. There are thousands and thousands of existential threats to your little bubble, your bubble of illusion going on there, not the least of which is the aggregate entropy of the meta crisis that's happened with just the software bloat from bloody Moore's law would be enough, but it's more than that. There's a meta crisis. The whole thing is bloated. It's all bloated, and the externalities are starting to come home. It's that damage has had to be outsourced to your generations, you younger people. You're the ones without a future now. You got nothing. You're working your ass off for this degree, and you're going to have to be working your ass off for the next 50 years to pay it off. In what job exactly? Oh, no, we're going to have a universal basic income. How are we going to do that? Oh, yeah, well, we're going to do it with modern monetary theory. I mean, we're going to have to be hyper vigilant about inflation, but maybe that's going to work. And yeah, as if that's going to get let through anyway. That's not going to happen. Oh, we're going to tax the rich. Are you, Bernie? How's that working out for you? Not going to happen. That's not what the economy is for. This economy is designed to extract from everybody else for that rich. It's not supposed to go the other way around. It will not go the other way around. It will never go the other way around. And you can have a revolution if you like, but that's just another turn of the wheel. You're just changing the faces of the oligarchs 5 minutes later, and, these people, they have plans for those things. They have bunkers in New Zealand. They have all kinds of stuff going on. Most of the military in the world today is actually private armies. Not a lot of people know that. People think we're pulling out of Afghanistan. The West is moving. It's not. It's moving slightly across the border. There and in the African countries they claim to be leaving, they just moved to the military base that's like 50 meters over the border. In the neighboring country, they're still running skirmishes across. They're also still leaving all the private military contractors there, which is actually more than the state military all put together. Oh, and they're still flying over and bombing the shit out of the place, by the way, but they're just doing it from, on the other side of this geopolitical boundary. Oh my goodness, it's such a shitstorm. What do you think you're going to do about it? What do you think you're going to do? None of this works. None of it changes. The only thing that's certain and that we know from an Indigenous cultural perspective, the most adaptive, a very adaptive culture, but no more adaptive than any other human cultures that are actually still a human culture or were ever once a human culture. That's what human beings do. You look at Aboriginal culture, that's a human culture. Anywhere where it's still operating with any vague shadow of a memory of what it is to live embedded in a landscape, to live within a land base and the law of that land, the limits of physics within that landscape, where you're not building illusions, where you're outsourcing your entropy and fucking with the second law of thermodynamics for a minute so that you can destroy a couple of generations into the future, or you can destroy a bunch of people over there. Nah, you look at the original world civilizations, every one of them is sitting in a desert now. Wasn't a desert where they started, that wasn't where they built it, but that's where it goes to. Yeah, decolonization's it's fun, but it's a distraction. I mean, you need to decivilize, and to do that, it's not going back to some ridiculous Hobbesian bloody myth about a primitive past running around in skins boinking each other on the head. 30% of Paleolithic deaths were homicides. Were they, bros? What did you check the Neanderthal church records for that? That's bullshit. That's some pseudoscience. Don't go projecting your Bear Grylls fucking survivalist bullshit narrative back onto a Paleolithic past. You're insulting your ancestors and mine. Basically, our human cultures are complex. That's how we grew this brain. We have very complex structures that make sure that we're living within the limits of our landscape, that we're living under the law of the land, and everybody needs to come back onto it, because here's the basic thing from that book I wrote a couple of years ago. The elders everywhere, they tell you the same thing. It's if you don't move with the land will move you. Stone Age cultures, what they call. These aren't static cultures that remain unchanging. These are very adaptive, constantly changing cultures, constantly moving with a landscape that is constantly moving. Every ecosystem on the planet migrates at least 100 meters every year. Every season, things have moved. Your landscape is constantly in motion. Everything is constantly in motion. That has been frozen to protect the zoning, to protect the bloody, the bullshit caste systems that have been thrown together to privilege a handful of people at your expense, at my expense, at our children and grandchildren's expense, at the expense of the earth that bore us. It's a ridiculous notion. This earth that's constantly in motion, that's constantly moving, and that we are called as an organism to move with. We are supposed to move with the landscape. So if you're building something, and you're building something that you think is permanent and that you're designing to be permanent, to be a sink for capital as long as possible for at least a century, what are you doing? And that's fine. If you're doing that, just say it, because we've all got to make a living. I make a living by ruining young minds. That's what I do. I'm an educator. I'm here to domesticate the minds of people. And I say that up front because that's what I'm doing. That's how I'm allowed to, very tentatively and tenuously cling onto the bottom rung of the ladder of the middle classes for a while, and it can feed more and more of my extended family while I'm doing that. I'm not going to be able to maintain that forever, but I'm open about what I'm doing there. What I'm doing there is ruining young people's minds for pay. So if you're building things, name what it is that you're doing. you're creating capital sinks for oligarchs. You're providing places for oligarchs to launder their money through. And if you're making a smart place, or you're making smart software, or bloody anything else, most of that's about laundering. It's about shifting value around, passing the buck, moving things around, shifting things around. How are you going to build a system where everybody can be just sheltered, fed, and do the things that they need to do? How are you going to do that? Is it a UBI? You can have a universal basic income. I did see a proposition. Your NFT nerds at the moment are proposing NFTs as the way forward. When they see a football team that's using NFTs as loyalty tokens for their biggest fans, and that these things have exchange value, that these things have certain privileges that come with them. They're talking about NFTs being a way to ensure a universal basic income for poor people, that basically in exchange for eyeball hours online, in exchange for spending their entire life online and viewing this and looking at that and doing that survey, that they can get rewarded with tokens that are NFTs. And that these things are really, they're just kind of like the coupons that you get. Nobody looks at on the back of the dockets anymore. I don't know why they keep printing them, because who looks at those things on the back of the docket that gives you 25% off something that you're going to fucking buy, or you'd never buy anyway? Gives you 2 for 1 in some place where you're not going to shop anyway. It's kind of all horse shit. There are no solutions. It's running down to the end of where we can't outsource this violence anymore. We can't outsource this entropy or this decay. It's kind of coming home, and it's coming home for all of you. So while you're sitting there and being honest with yourself about what you're really building, which is capital sinks for pricks, you probably also need to be starting to think about the narratives, the designs, the things that is going to be needed going forward. And when we move ourselves into the 1,000-year cleanup, when the oligarchs are done doing what they're doing, when the wheel finally stops, what are you going to need to build? What are you going to need to be able to make that makes communities able to be mobile, to shift at a moment's notice? Talk to some refugees and see what kind of priorities they have for determining value, and what they're going to move, and who they're going to move, and how they figure out how to do that. You're going to have to figure out all of these affordances of mobility. These are going to have to be designed by somebody. Maybe that's going to be designed by you. But if we want if we want to transition with as little blood and guts as possible, with as little collateral damage as possible, as we transition into this culture of the 1,000-year cleanup, we're going to need good design for that. We're going to need some good minds on that. So like I say, I'm in the business of destroying young minds. At the same time, I'm building the only tools that are going to last to go forward as those young people with their damaged minds try to establish the cultures of transition for the 1,000-year cleanup. And the thing they're going to need more than anything is good story. So I put together good story. I put together good cognition, and I leave them out there like seeds. And I hope they get the chance to pick them up. And I hope that my job is not destroying their minds enough that they won't be able to even recognize those things when they find them. You're in the same boat. You have to ruin people's lives. You have to exclude people. You have to render people homeless. You have to create capital for people that is excludable. You have to do this on Aboriginal land. You have to do this on land that is not land anymore, but that is enclosures, little enclosures of death. You have to do this that are on enclosures of value, that increase in value the more people you can keep away from it. So you need to protect that with violence, and design the systems and structures of violence that keep people away from that property, that make it limitable and excludable, that create insufferable demand, that makes the prices soar. So that's your business. That's what you're doing. But you have to do that. Now, some people don't do it. They don't play ball. Good luck to them. Where are they? They're homeless. They're sitting on the side of the road. You can go and do that, or you can play ball and do what you need to do in this system to feed yourself and feed your family, but to at least have a hobby that you're sitting and actually teasing away at these things, at these insufferable problems, that you're connecting with other people so that you've got a little bit more computational power. You're developing communities of thought that are actually trying to reimagine what value will be, reimagine what the built environment will be in a necessarily mobile and adaptive culture of transition, culture of 1,000-year cleanup. I think I busted that nut completely now. That's I can't riff on that anymore. How long have we been going for? How's my time?
You've been going for about 40, 45. So we've got about 10 minutes left. So if you've hit your
I
limit,
have. I think I'm starting to repeat myself too much now. So we're gonna have to mix it up. Somebody's gonna have to bring their brain into here. Otherwise, I'm just gonna entropically spiral down a little southern hemisphere drain of my own thoughts.
Well, that was like a unbelievable journey, Tyson. I loved it. I know, like from the chat, bunch of people are posting their appreciation, and I'm just wondering if anyone would like to jump in and ask a question, or spark a new thought, or just offer a comment. I just invite you to, you can post a question in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and pipe up. And if too many voices come in at once, we'll handle that when it happens. Everyone's absorbing.
Yeah.
I
see someone's interested in decivilization there.
I have a question.
Yeah, Ryan, go for it.
I was wondering, sort of, first of all, that was like everyone's saying, that was a great talk and very engaging and very informative. And I think you laid out a lot of all the problems, and I think you also laid out some of the solutions. But I think I'm curious if you could speak a little bit more about more of the solutions. Like you talked about putting good story out there, talked about like building communities for this culture of 1,000-year cleanup. But I guess I'm curious if you could expand on other solutions or other actions we can take to address the problem.
I just think the closest thing that you have in your culture is complexity theory, a complexity lens for being able to approach that in any useful way. And once you start engaging with that, you'll see that emergence is really the only way of systemic things occurring, systemic changes occurring, and being co-designed, with the system, by the system, all nodes in that system, etc. There's a big kind of complex co-design that goes on. So emergence really is the only way for things to occur where there aren't unseen externalities, where there aren't catastrophic externalities that are being detonated somewhere else. And this is the tricky thing. That's why I direct people's attention to the externalities of their things, because straight away your mind goes to solution. What's the solution? How dare you be speaking unless you have a solution that you're proposing at the end of it? I'm not a fucking salesman. I'm not selling you anything here. That I don't have a solution. And if I did have one, I would be the first to encourage you, don't listen to that. Don't listen to anybody who says they've got a solution, especially if they came up with it themselves. Or even a committee or anything else, or someone who's got, what about the Finnish model? The Finnish model's got, the best outcomes, so why don't we just get that? Well, that doesn't work here, bros. That's why. And it probably won't work there for long either. It just temporarily has some good outcomes on these metrics that you're looking at, but it also has its externalities and damages, So there are no solutions. What there is an engagement with the genuine systems in which you live, and that understanding that you're not observing a system and then intervening on it. You're actually part of a system that is observing itself and that is designing itself, and in which there is emergence. Now, as you go deeper into complexity theory, you'll see things like, basins of attraction. And so that's interesting because you start to identify basins of attraction. You start to figure out how to, pay attention to tails of distribution and, pay attention to outliers. And then you experience this nonlinear thought where you're looking at strange attractors. You're looking at what's interesting. You're meeting the people from the tails of the distribution and say, hey, let's conduct a safe to fail experiment in real time, just to see what happens with this. And together you begin identifying basins of attraction where you can focus your energy and work towards emergence. You know what's fucking hard though is getting funding for that, because you have to have your solution first. And this is how our brains are twisted. And this is the way I twist my students' brains too. I twist them towards that problem, reaction, solution, sales, NLP bullshit. Yeah.
Tyson, there's a question in the chat about how would you describe the idea of a strange attractor?
Couldn't you just Google it? I just try to think of a good example. Strange attractors are funny, and I guess the neuroscience stuff is the most interesting stuff to look at with strange attractors, because that's a complex system. And how the hell do you figure out how that works? This little biological sludge producing all this amazing computational power, But yeah, so this, strange attractors are just kind of, I don't know, like these little nodes where just things start to happen. You're not sure what the function is of that node in that moment. And it's behaving weirdly. And why? Why is it doing that? And then suddenly there are these other things that start happening around it, and a basin of attraction forms around that, whereby, some kind of complex emergence, comes out there, and there's a kind of a system within a system that's spawned there, this little act of creation. And then you realize the knock-on effect of that throughout the system, and it's perfect. There is no entropy. But of course, every system produces entropy. Of course. And you do need to outsource that to another system, but this needs to be in closed loops. So it has to be so that the entropy of your system is another system's lunch. That's what feeds that. And then there's an interdependent relation that's happening. So then an equal amount, that's getting back to first law of thermodynamics, and things are being recycled. Nothing's created or destroyed. You got to have your closed loops. At the moment, civilization runs on open loops, so it's extractive at one end and then shit out the other.
And there's a question in the chat from Jim Denley. Yeah.
Not so Googleable. Yeah, well, it's not. And, and I can only talk to my take on it. That has, and that has meaning and ways of being used differently, depending on where you put it. But that's me trying to translate this idea to people of these abstractions. And I don't know, and the way that these abstractions get built into the stack of a reality, So for example, a word like culture it shouldn't be a separate concept from anything else. Arts, culture, society, all these things, these abstractions, these are not things that should be separate things from your landscape. The land is the source of the law, the ecosystem that you're a part of. Your governance models it's not even biomimicry because it's so embedded, it's part of your ecological niche within that ecosystem. Your governance models come from that through a totemic system that's mapped to all of the entities of landscape and phenomena within that landscape seasonally, which is a shifting landscape. So then that's shifting. So therefore your economy is always shifting depending on what other groups you're trading with and all the rest. It's all this stuff. It's so freaking dynamic that there is no abstraction of something, a stupid idea like culture. We have no word for it in our language. So, if I look at how people try to approximate the concept when they have to talk about it, that it's an entire phrase. It's that arc when you break it down, arc, place, hour, yimnang, kind of like this or in the way of, and then wun, being. So it's like, you could, if you wanted to break it down, like, get a sense of things being, being like your place. But that's kind of not it either. That's just a biomimicry abstraction, so, but it doesn't really mean the translation. It just means that's your way. That's your, I don't know what you're going to call it, ontology, and abstractify it again. No, there's so much more. So I don't know. It's just a thought experiment, really, of trying to, describe abstractions without using abstractions, or trying to translate what an abstractionless reality is through the use of abstractions, which is even trickier. But I do like these little puzzles. I like my thought experiments. They're fun. Yeah, and that's not Googleable.
Thank you, Tyson. And we've just ticked past 1 o'clock. So I think, now is, and that last thought about thought experiment is a good place to draw things to a close for this first part of today. So I know lots of people will have to jet off to various other meetings and responsibilities and so on. So I'll just say at this stage, thank you so much, Tyson, for a really incredible, a tour de force, really, of thinking and speaking and storytelling and yarning and so on. This is really wonderful. I urge anyone who hasn't read the book already to pick up a copy and dive in. It's sort of a kind of endlessly enlightening work. For those of you who can stick around for a bit more of a chat, if you've read some or all of the book and would like to talk more about it, we'll take about a 5-minute break and then reconvene. So just time for people to, pop to the bathroom, grab a cup of tea or a glass of water or whatever you need to do. And we'll reconvene at about 7 or 8 minutes past the hour. So I'll see a bunch of you shortly. And Tyson's going to stick around and join us for that conversation too. So thank you, Tyson, and see some of you shortly.